I have watched all of the episodes so far from the How to Write podcast hosted by David Perel, but there is a major piece missing for me. In this video, I want to share some of the ideas that I've used from the podcast, but also discuss some of the points David's made that I don't agree with. But before we talk about any of that, I think we need to talk about AI and writing first. I was exploring the idea of how humans can sort of test whether it was AI written or human written. I came across the Alan Turing test and went to look a bit more, and I actually found that Maggie Appleton did a presentation on something very similar.
So, right, we all know the original Turing test, right? You have two humans and a computer in rooms, and there's walls between them, and they can only pass text messages back and forth. If a computer can convince one of the humans that it's actually a human, it passes the test. On the new web, we are the ones under scrutiny, right? We have to prove that we are actually human and that we are not computers. I think this is going to be quite challenging given how sophisticated these agents are getting.
And I agree. I don't think the tricks are going to last very long because AI learns very quickly, so we won't be able to use those forever. Which means that either readers need to somehow get better at detecting humans, or the writers need to be better at signaling how they are human, which to me, I think is just better writing, however you define that. Which brings me to quality content or better content, and I don't think AI is going to be useful for that because AI obviously spews out what AI and all the other content is spewing out. So you'd need some sort of original, however you define original, thought or thinking within the writing that you're doing. Yes, AI could be useful for exploring ideas and looking what other people have said, but that to me is more research rather than the writing process itself of thinking through ideas and coming up with your own opinion and your own understanding of whatever the topic is. And this for me is where quality content is where there is value in the depth of understanding that could be adding more jargon, which adds complexity, but also reducing the jargon. So the added framework, marketing, sales, whatever terms that separates things off. I think reducing those, so simplifying the explanations, also shows that you're potentially more human. So for me, quality writing is explaining the depth of understanding with simple terms, not necessarily jargon heavy or additive terms. Now, David tweeted or posted on X something recently that I think was meant to be provocative, but I'm not sure, and it certainly sparked conversation. Almost every piece of writing can be improved by getting to the point faster. Just as a quick side note, I like things on the internet to say that I like it because it's made me think, not necessarily because I agree or disagree whatever point's been made, so I like it because it made me think, just as a preface there. And the reason I say that is because I don't agree. I'm not saying that David's suggesting this is a rule you need to follow, but it's certainly guidance. That AI can do that probably better than individuals when they're first learning a topic. If they have less expertise, AI could explain something far quicker, in other words, get to the point faster. So is that better writing? I don't necessarily think so, because I think it matters how you get to the point. So the words before the point is made, how have you got them there? Where's the depth of explanation in explaining why it matters, why it doesn't matter, the context, the nuance? If that isn't explained in enough depth, then I don't think the reader will fully grasp what the point is or could mean. You can see here I quote posted, I guess is what you'd call it, and I like what Brian said here about smart brevity, but also emphasizes the underestimation of nuance or context, which is where I think the guidance from the podcast to read old books or read old books and new books I think is an interesting point of conversation, because at the moment, from what I've seen, most of the consumption is from books, old books, new books, or whatever they are books, but I don't think the sources need to be books. They could also be conversations, they could be videos, they could be podcasts, and even though a book is old in time, you can have someone read out, or AI read out, or whatever, read out the book. And some of the best pieces of a book might not be in the book. It might be in the footnotes, or the notes next to the book, or a conversation, or a journal piece from a conversation that they did at a conference somewhere, which in some cases is actually on YouTube. There's a perfect example, is a really old clip of Richard Feynman. The clips aren't written anywhere, it's just him answering questions from someone interviewing him, and he discusses things that could relate to things like the Feynman technique and the way you would explain things and why questions, but you wouldn't have seen that or know about that or the way that he thinks if you just read his books on physics. In modern times, a lot of those conversations, instead of happening at universities or at coffees or wherever, happen in forums, whether that's Discord or Reddit. Yes, there are trolls in there, but having access and using all of those sources to get different views from old books, new books, different sources, I think is where this is beneficial. And this is where AI, I think, at the moment is lacking, because obviously it doesn't understand tonality in language, it can't read body language or anything like that. It's mainly just text and words, and it is just predicting text, which sometimes we say something, but the meaning behind whatever words it is that we've said isn't what the words actually mean. So using a variety of sources, mainly conversations with people, which is why I have my schedule open, because I like talking to people, but also other sources, not just books, is useful. So that's me not necessarily disagreeing with David, but I think it could be extended a little further, which brings me to these challenging conversations, because online things can get emotional. It does become an us versus them, very fight heavy, which is why I try and look for psychologically safe environments. Obviously, the podcast that I have with John is a psychologically safe environment where we explore and challenge each other, both of us poking at the conversation points. Online in forums and even in books and articles, it's very difficult to work out what people are trying to say because it's words. There's asynchronized communication, and I think partly due to the asynchronicity, it's difficult for people to say, I don't know, which obviously we don't know everything and we can't know what other people are thinking asynchronistically, because obviously there's just text on a screen. You don't know the tone, you don't know the previous context that they are coming from there and the context that you're coming from, so there can be misunderstandings in communication. And this is where reach around knowledge comes into a lot of these conversations, people using information they think is related to what is being spoken about, but it's not. And a lot of the time, from my experience at least, and from the research I've read, the reach around knowledge is popular knowledge, which could be from AI, from popular terms, uses, or explanations of different ideas, which may not be grounded in research, they may not be depth of understanding. It's just become popular because a video went viral, or a book did really well in sales, or an academic author that's really well published and well viewed has this opinion. Then using that reach around knowledge in the conversation often leads to rational errors. This is all in meta-ignorance research. You follow the path, you follow the steps, you follow the algorithm that other people have taken because it looks like the problem that they solved with that algorithm, but in actual fact, it's not the same problem, it's a different context. So the rational error is, oh, you do A, B, C, and D, and this is what AI does all of the time. Oh, you mean this? Well, these are the answers to your problem. That's not the problem I'm talking about, and then you have to tell it the problem again, and you go back, it's just a pain. But people do this all the time in conversations, which is why when I have a conversation, I try and avoid saying, oh, this is my point of view, and to give as much context about my understanding of what it is that they're talking about and what I'm thinking about, and I air my thinking through communication, which most of the time is writing, but in the podcast, I speak as I'm thinking, so John knows what I'm thinking about as we're having the conversation, rather than it being me internally thinking something and then saying something blanket and him going, what do you want about? And doing all of this thinking avoids copying other people's content, which adds depth. It adds value because I have gained a depth of understanding from my explanations of whatever it is, whatever the topic is. And that to me is where the value of writing comes from, not copying what other people have said and say, hey, this is my opinion, but going into the depths of research and understanding the roots of where those words, those terms, those ideas, those concepts have come from, and then saying, well, I agree because of this, or I disagree because of that, not, oh yes, I do this and this is how I do it, which emphasizes the why. And what David went on to say in a latter part of one of his videos,
when I came across this word Archegos, I think it's in the book of Acts chapter 3, it's in the book of Acts twice, and then it's also in the book of Hebrews twice. And Archegos has multiple meanings. It means author, founder, pioneer, leader. Author, founder, pioneer, leader, same word.
Now, I don't think one word having multiple meanings is unique. From an ecological approach, I would suggest that words are information that specify affordances or opportunities for behavior or opportunities for meaning. This suggests meanings are in people, not words, or at least the relationship between the person and the word. But using David's description of Archegos, it's a process, not necessarily steps, but continuous actions or behaviors that you can do which would embody those mentioned professions. But when I look at all of those professions that were mentioned, I also think, well, thinker, someone critically reflecting on ideas. So thinker, author, founder, pioneer, leader. And for me, this is why I think writing is so important, because writing is thinking. However, David said something that I disagree with.
People say that writing is thinking, rewriting is rethinking, and what writing is that writing is vertical, whereas thinking is horizontal.
And David goes on to explain that he thinks writing, you can go deeper, i.e. vertical, you can go deeper, whereas thinking is horizontal, you don't go as deep. And he says that you naturally don't go as deep when you're thinking instead of writing. But I disagree, and this could be because of my interpretation of the words that he's using. If I ask myself, can I explore a topic deeply without symbols on an object, i.e. words on a page or words on a screen or symbols on a whiteboard, whatever it is? Yes. Conversation. Can I think deeply about a topic without someone else there, so there's no back and forth? Yes. Talking with myself. Right now I'm talking with myself and I'm going deep into a topic. I did video journaling as well. I'm going deep into a topic. Then can I think deeply about something without verbalizing the information? Yes, that is what thinking is. Now, David suggested it's not natural to think deeply about an idea, which I disagree with. I think lots of people do that. But also when you think about imagination, what imagination is, when you're imagining the solution to a problem, that's thinking deeply about one specific idea. You're going deep to solve the problem. And for me, this is where remembering is more important to the conversation here. Remembering is part of thinking. Remembering is thinking. It's the continuous process of perceiving, acting, and cognizing within the world that we are embedded in. But the process of remembering sometimes requires some assistance for it to be quicker or more efficient in certain contexts, and writing can help with remembering. But also practicing the information that you're using helps with remembering. So if you're doing something repeatedly, then you're less likely to forget it because you're doing it multiple times. You're practicing it. The same with being in a conversation. The other person can help you remember the information. Something else in the world could help you remember the information while you're thinking. It doesn't need to be writing. So for me, adding the horizontal and vertical adds unnecessary complexity to the explanation, which would be those additive words I discussed earlier when it comes to the AI talking. I don't think we need the added complexity here. The idea that thinking, remembering, perceiving and acting and cognizing in the world comes from ecological dynamics, so I do recognize it can be a little bit sideways when we're changing base foundation assumptions in science here, but that directly relates to the major piece that I feel is missing inside of the podcast right now. David, talking about his course, Rite of Passage, says,
so what I'm going to do based on all this is I am changing the mission of my work at Rite of Passage, where I want to help people find, publish, and share their core idea. And I want to make it the best thing they've ever written.
Find, publish, share, all continuous actions. And the podcast does a great job at telling you things that people have done, but it doesn't do much of the showing of how they are doing it, how they are thinking. Now, I'm not talking about the features of export from Obsidian to Word or use Scrivener or whatever tool. And that's not what I'm talking about when I say how. I'm talking about showing the thinking, the actual continuous process of thinking, I've moved this section up and down, or I deleted that section, or I changed this wording, and the small nuance changes you make whilst you're thinking, the decisions, why you changed that word, why you changed that sentence. Granted, that is probably inside of the course, but having some insight from those expert writers as to the decisions they're making with those word changes would be really nice. And there is that in some conversations, but I feel that I'm not seeing it through the conversations of where they're finding ideas, publishing and sharing ideas, the actual how of the thinking. Where did they go? Like, what was the journey, as it were, to get to that point, rather than discussing the broader, higher level intrigues. Maybe you disagree, and there are sections of podcasts where they're talking about the showing information that they are thinking about, but I haven't attuned to information in any of the podcast episodes that I have seen, at least. So if you do have a recommendation, put it in the comment section so I can go have a look. But I've tried doing this with Obsidian, showing exactly how it is that I work. I've tried starting a series, and that's what I will continue to do, to show how it is that I'm thinking through things. So maybe have a watch of this video up here and let me know your thoughts, because I don't know how to do it to make it effective for viewers yet.